those 5 things every week and we will be a democratic man. You won't believe number 4.
And a lot of people that are so angry and so scared are that because they feel uncared for by the society.
All they get is misdirections and completely wrong answers.
Antidemocratic narratives exploit male isolation by offering promises of power, control, and dominance as substitutes for basic human needs: love, belonging, and meaning.
This sets them up for a double loneliness. People do the easier answer because it seems attractive, even though it will backfire on them massively.
Thank you very much for joining us for Discussing Men. This is a reading and discussion group for professionals who work with men and boys, and anyone who wants to stay on top of the current research, policy trends, and evolving conversations about masculinities. So for us, it's an excuse to do more reading and critical reflection on the things that we read, and basically do some peer learning. Alex and I are organizing this group. So this is organized by Alex Dimitrievich from Men Against Violence, an organization in Malta, and myself, Dr. Simon Vogt, organization named Pathforge in Germany. We're both members of the Men Engage Europe Steering Committee, and this whole group is held in collaboration with the Men Engage Alliance. So the aim of this group is simple. We want to build shared expertise, deepen our understanding, and support ongoing professional development. Today, we will be discussing a report by a project called Men for Them. And Alex is a member of this project. So I thought, Alex, perhaps you could introduce us a little bit to the project and tell us what the reading today is about.
So, hi everyone, whoever watches this and who follows what we are trying to do here. So, just to introduce Men for Them briefly, it's basically it's a collaborative co-creation project involving 6 universities: University of Amsterdam, Uppsala, Leibniz, Gdańsk, Bergamo, and there is another institution, ECE, which is National Center for Social Research. Then it involves also 2 strategic partners, which is Emancipator from Holland and Via Berlin, which is artistic group from Berlin. It's funded by Horizon, it's a EU fund, and it also involves Men Engage. I am there in the capacity of representing Men Engage Network. But it also it involved Men Engage organizations, which is, as I said already, I mentioned Emancipator from Holland, but there is Gender Alliance Initiative from Greece, Federal Forum for Men from Germany, Share the Care Foundation from Poland, MAN from Sweden, and Cerchio degli Uomini, or Men's Circle from Italy. The idea is to look into what are basically it's to look into radicalization of young men or men and young men in the current world, and then they try to develop strategies and approaches on how to prevent it and how to transform political masculinity towards more democratic masculinity, because radical right-wing extreme masculinities are in their core are undemocratic and danger for democracy. So the idea is to cover the topic from all possible sides. So we have a scientific team, which basically they working on looking into different kind of interventions, working with men that have been published, that have been tried and tested and published in academic journals or academic literature, and they should report based on what they found in as I said, academic literature. Then there is a second report, which is the one we are discussing today, which is a report based on good practices of these organizations, 6 organizations, Men Engage organization, from their work on what they do. And the third part, which is the final part, which is involving art. And the idea is that based on the experiences of organizations working for Men Engage and input that we provided the artists with, they will create a large action role play or LARP, which will be one of the, create a new way or another way of reaching these men and boys and working and creating some process of transformative masculinity into something which is more pro-democratic and not anti-democratic in the very least. So project started last January, and it will work. It will continue for 3 years with regular performances of LARP and regular meetings, and trying to push this idea forward. More or less that would be it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, thanks for this great introduction. So it's really exciting to be hosting this with you together, Alex, since you're on this project itself. And as far as I understand, you are also one of the people who were interviewed for this very report that we're discussing today. And just to drive that home, so the report that we're looking at is titled Democratic Masculinities, Best Practices Report, Expert Organizations, Interventions, and Key Mechanisms. And Men Engage is one of the expert organizations, and Alex was representing this. Now, the idea of this report is to explore the strategies for countering anti-democratic tendencies amongst men and boys. And this is what we will discuss today, I guess, right? So I thought that maybe it would be interesting to kick this off from just like a general question about the connection between masculinities and democracy, because I think that it's maybe not a connection that everyone automatically makes, right? That the current kind of crisis of democracy that maybe is happening in the world right now, in which a lot of the changes that we're seeing in the world involve some sort of not necessarily anti-democratic, but maybe, things that like promote political movements that are a bit more right-wing, a bit more autocratic, and erosion of certain democratic institutions in different countries. We have seen that in countries such as Poland or in Hungary, or currently happening in the US, and a whole bunch of other countries in which various all the political parties that have been successful have been quite set on introducing or redesigning the rule of law in the countries, for example, or maybe changing the way in which certain structures that are there to protect democratic processes, to change them so that maybe they are able to make changes to the states without those kind of democracy protections in line. So we know that this is happening, and we also talk a lot about the crisis of masculinity. But what is interesting in this report and in this project at large is that it makes a strong connection between the two, and says that, yes, the kind of changes, anti-democratic changes, are very closely related to changes in masculinity. And I was wondering if, we could just focus on that for a bit.
Yes, of course. Well, I think what the project, the very driving force behind the project is that, as you said, there is a certain democratic principle and democratic practices which have been assumed, I think, by all of us who have the democracy at heart, so to say. I have assumed to be solid and safe, have taken a couple of strong hits, and I think that the project started with the realization that work with masculinities or in masculinities and trying to figure out about what does it mean to be a man, and man's place in this world and so on and so forth does not exist in vacuum. There is obviously there are political changes that are happening that have effects on economy. There are economic crises that, since 2008 and what have you, we are constantly reminded of it, that, the financial and global economic system is not safe, and, the jobs are not guaranteed. The wealth distribution is going berserk. And that creates a lot of insecurities for everyone, but we are practitioners or people who are involved in working with men and masculinities, and the realization is that this obviously does not exist in a vacuum, and that these things are all closely connected. That we have forces. You can look at it from any way, from not necessarily hardcore right wing, if you want to say it like that, but we have forces that are tapping into these insecurities, and they are trying to provide some sort of sense of stability or sense of direction to these young boys and men in a very insecure world at the age when they are still exploring and finding their place in the society, and they're feeding them with the ideas that are very, I believe, very harmful to those boys themselves, very rigid ideas of masculinity. But those ideas then have there is a logical conclusion when you take them to their logical conclusion that are leading towards more radicalized and extreme political views, and certain political movements benefit from it. So obviously they see the interest in prolonging and hammering on and on this traditional rigid masculinity, because it works for them. It explains the power as desirable, control as normal, and it ignores the last 50, 60, 70 years of progress in terms of creating more equality and more genuine and benign masculinities. So yeah, it's we live in the real world, and we cannot escape the fact that young men and boys are brought up in the world where there are many influences that can be easily reached. Online world helps, social media helps, and that can be social media and online world that can be used for good as much as for bad. And the whole idea is coming. We need to try and do something about it and try to be more innovative, whilst at the same time building upon the experience and knowledge of organizations which have been doing this work for a long time now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is really interesting, and it's also quite clear in the polls, I think, right? With many more extreme right-wing or political parties having much more backing amongst men. I know that in Germany, where I'm based, the Alternative für Deutschland, so the most right-wing political party we have, I think has twice as many male voters than female voters right now. So something is definitely there. And I think that this report, like you say, quite rightly highlights the kind of precarity in which many men and boys feel in today's world, and how these sort of movements are very effective at using this precarity or appealing to men and boys through this sort of promises to end that precarity, and in this way kind of gathering their support. So I'm really curious about how this pans out in terms of well, what it is that they actually do. So, since this report is very focused on offering practical recommendations to practitioners, I think it was really quite interesting to read what they say. What are the mechanisms of the anti-democratic radicalization, and what kind of we should be doing to make a difference in that. And I quite liked one quote in there. So towards the end of the introductory section, or the first section in which they describe the current political landscape, the authors write, in summary, the mechanisms of anti-democratic radicalization cannot be separated from the emotional and cultural landscape shaping and shaped by men's gendered socialization. A mix of social isolation, emotional repression, and desire for purpose, and the need for belonging creates fertile ground for authoritarian black and white narratives to take root. So that's the things that you were saying, right? These are the kind of things that men are experiencing. But I wondered, what is your... Hessel is joining us. Fantastic. What is your... maybe let's welcome him.
Yes.
Hi, Hessel. Fantastic you could join us.
Yeah, sorry. I got home like half an hour ago and then I just read the first sentence of the description and it said it was postponed. And then I was like, oh, that is so right for me at the moment. But then I just remembered like, oh, it's at 10th of November. That's today. So it was already postponed from earlier
to today. Yeah.
To today.
Well, I'm glad that you could manage, that you could join us. We have just started, but then for everyone who is watching us on the live stream or maybe the video later on, Schaaf is the author of this report. So it is fantastic to have you with us today. And then we already did a little introduction since Alex was also involved with Men for Them. He told us a little bit about what this whole project is about. But maybe you would like to also say a few words about what this report was for you and how writing it has proceeded, and maybe give us your introduction to what this project is about, and maybe something about yourself as well.
Yeah, nice. Happy to be here, and nice that it's organized. So my name is Hessel. I'm from the Netherlands. I work at Emancipator for about 2 years now. And yeah, Men for the Future of European Democracies was my first big project, also my first big writing project. And yeah, when I heard, I think, a couple of months before the project really started that we were like looking internally who was going to do it, I thought, I'd really like to do this one. It's really close to me, the intersection of like political radicalization, male loneliness, the search of boys and men for belonging in the world. Also, something that's been a big topic in my own life. So I was very happy to join. And already with the first, we had a kickoff session in the Netherlands with some a lot of the European partners joining, which was already very inspiring. And in the end, that was like the beginning point of the article that I wrote. And I really think it's very necessary to talk about these topics and also to talk about them. I think as organizations, we're talking about them a lot, and we kind of like also what I got internally, but also from our partners, that we have quite a clear picture of the problems and like some ways to solve them. But then on the other hand, we're doing this European Union project where we of course have like demands and wishes from the European Union, and also limited, there's a lot of development and like limited clarity on what's going to happen with implementation, etc. So this is also an interesting dance, and also something that comes to the fore, I think, in the paper that in the end me and Jip Mars from Emancipator wrote together because of timing issues. They did a lot of the editing. So I think a lot of the conclusions were already were crowdsourced from the Men Engaged partners from Europe, and some I think were not it's like already working theory and working practice for a long time. So it was nice to bring them together, but it's also like, interesting what's gonna happen with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction. So we just started talking about how you opened the report. So in the first section, you write about the mechanism of anti-democratic radicalization. And we started talking a little bit with Alex already about the connection between masculinity and the anti-democratic tendencies, because it's not that obvious maybe to everyone. Alex has already outlined how this is happening. I was saying just as you were joining that you have a fantastic quote in there, which talks about how the kind of precarity in which many men find themselves both materially and kind of ideologically, let's say, creates a fertile ground for this sort of radicalization. And it's you write, a mix of social isolation, emotional repression, desire for purpose, and need for belonging that so many men feel. But I was going to take this further and ask about what you in the report discuss as traditional masculinity. And you mentioned that there might be other names for it that different people would use. But this traditional masculinity has certain features that kind of make it particularly fertile for that sort of radicalization. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think what we've been experiencing a lot in the last couple of months, especially after adolescence came out, a lot of attention in the Netherlands as well and Europe-wide for the manosphere and the answers that it gives. And of course, then like we often use the name Andrew Tate to kind of like explain this whole world and the ideas that they propose. But we always emphasize that it's important to look at the specific answers that they're giving and to talk about how they are like strong answers or not or something, but it's much more about the search that like human beings have, but with what we teach our boys and men, what especially young men have in finding purpose in life, feeling appreciated as a human being, feeling seen. A lot of the old certainties in life have disappeared over the last 50 years. I don't know whether it's like religion and neighborhoods and stable work, being closely connected to your immediate family, or even friends that move around a lot. So there's a lot of things. Globalization that destabilizes a lot. So a lot of like problems that we as humans in general face. So this is an important thing that a lot of people are searching now for: belonging, certainty, being rooted, etc. For young men, this is doubly so because they're still being told that they should be a provider, but that at the same time, women have managed to move into these traditionally male-dominated spaces of like the economic space, political space, etc. So they're no longer sole providers, and often as a society we say that we don't want that. So their space got smaller while they haven't been able to, or it's always a risk or always a possible step down if they lean into what are traditionally seen as feminine qualities. So care work, but also being caring, etc. So their space got smaller. So this is something that young men specifically like complicates their place in life, that old masculinity doesn't work anymore. So they have all these questions, this search, but from a young age, they're being raised with the emphasis of knowing everything, being in competition with each other, not showing vulnerability, not learning to communicate, not learning to identify their own emotions, talking about them, giving them a space socially, because if they do, they manage to get ridiculized, teased, like even, possibilities of physical violence. So all young boys often feel that they're very alone in these questions, because other boys of their age don't show it. So they feel that they're the only ones dealing with all these uncertainties. They don't manage to express them. So this sets them up for a double loneliness. Like there's a loneliness of not expressing it, but also the loneliness of other people seeming to understand what's going on. So they have this search, but they don't express it socially with their real lived environment. And then they see, they go online, whether it's through video games or Instagram, social media, and there they find very clear-cut answers from they're pushed there by algorithms. And these spaces are set up by people with a lot of money behind it, so it's super slick. And there they hear super clear answers, like, "Oh, you're searching." And Andrew Tate often starts with "Oh, people don't understand how lonely men are." That makes sense. Like, I'm a lonely man. And then you get the message "Oh, you only need to get muscles, be strong, earn money, get big cars, and then you are appreciated. You find a place in the world." So there you see the morphing of this real human need for belonging, but also for clarity and for answers in life, going especially with individual boys through this digital world into radicalization. And one thing I'll wrap this up with one more remark, and that it's also that young boys are seen by both their teachers and also their parents as being non-emotional, as being either stable or retreated into themselves. So they're also not asked a lot of questions about how they're doing, and so this is really something that you saw, for example, in adolescence, but also something I hear talking a lot with teachers. "Oh, but the boys seem to be okay. They seem to not have that many searches, etc." So this mask that the boys get taught to have also is reinforced by parents or by all adults around them, not giving space to these insecurities that these boys have.
Excellent, thank you. I really like that at some point you have I think in the conclusion you have a really nice quote saying that antidemocratic narratives exploit male isolation by offering promises of power, control, and dominance as substitutes for basic human needs: love, belonging, and meaning. And I think you spoke about this right now as well, saying how, those people are really searching for meaning. They're searching for belonging. They're searching for love as well. But instead of this, they're kind of given promises of power, control, and dominance. And I think it's really interesting how in your report, I think it really comes out quite nicely how this becomes like a self-perpetuating vicious circle, right? Because by becoming more drawn towards this hierarchical dominance style, they effectively prevent themselves from finding the love and belonging and meaning, because the love and belonging requires opening up to people and being a bit vulnerable and maybe letting people in to the fact that we're all kind of not perfect and maybe we all have problems and we've all got, something that we struggle with, and that the search for meaning is not just, you can't just get $1 million and a Ferrari and then you have found the meaning of life. This is not what it is. And when you get it, in fact, you're potentially going further away from it because you are spending the time that you could be spending on actually finding something meaningful on something else, right? And also you are ending up valuing something that is not actually contributing to you feeling loved and appreciated, maybe beyond some sort of very shallow, expressions of appreciation that you might get by impressing a few people when you drive up your Ferrari to them for the first time.
Exactly. These fleeting moments. Yeah,
that's the kind of thing that wears off pretty quickly.
But that is exactly why why this manosphere and these influencers, the damage that they do is incredible, because there are so many issues that have been mentioned in the last 20 minutes here that are really needs efforts and thought and work in order to provide or to offer a sense of directions, meaning to these especially young boys. And all they get at the algorithms, you mentioned algorithms, they are bad, but I think that social media is now moving towards AI running instead of algorithm, and I think it's gonna get worse. All they get is misdirections and completely wrong answers. They still like this thing about going to the gym and like get strong, get money, get women, get power, be in control. They tell them, women are only attracted to 20% of all men, kind of the top, whatever, alphas or whatever they're called, whilst they are not competing with men anymore. It's not a competition. Now women have resources that, maybe in some previous time it was different, but now they are competing between, if they are competing for women, they are competing with women, staying alone, and not being dependent on income or protection or whatever of a man, because women now, we are talking in general terms, do not need to get married and be well, in a way, property of a man.
And this is where a lot of the bitterness against feminism comes from.
It's coming from
where
there,
it also-
and instead of really, look, women do not need men as they used to. Women move, and women are. This is another thing where women for last 250, 300 years have been working on themselves. Women have been. They started a movement. They saw that something is wrong. That that they don't want to take it, and over last 250, 300 years, there is some progress, in questioning their role in society, their place in society, who they are and what they want to be and where they want to go. And men, not so much. And the talk of masculinities is practically relatively new. And instead of investing all our time in dealing with question of masculinities and how we can work around and contribute and make changes for better, we are actually having to battle a lot of misinformation and a lot of people who are basically dragging us further down, backwards. It's terrible.
I think it's just, in this context, this report is actually really interesting because, Hessel, what you recommend in here is that while this fighting for all those things is really vital and we should continue doing that, it is really important that we provide all of those men and especially boys with some, positive guidance as to what it is that they could be doing, or what those better masculinities could be like. And I think in here, I wanted to also bring in, so we had a question from someone who's watching the live stream, the spiritual gentleman. Thank you very much for a question, which was to be a bit clear about what we actually mean by men and masculinities. And I think it would be useful maybe because as far as I remember in the report, you take a rather broad definition of, people who have been socialized as men, but we have more nuance when it comes to masculinities, and we use masculinities in plural. And I think a big part of the report is actually really related to this question. It's about, maybe finding ways to promote less of certain types of masculinities and more of certain other types of masculinities. And the traditional masculinity, I guess, is the one that we want less of, maybe. And you mentioned words such as caring masculinities and others, and I wanted to invite you to talk about that. And just before I pass it on, I really liked also that you write at some point in the report that this is not only about prevention, it's about empowerment. And when I first read it, I was thinking male empowerment. That sounds potentially that could be misinterpreted, right? But I think you are later quite careful to say that it's specific kinds of masculinity that we want to empower, right? And a specific kind of ways of being men. So I think it's really interesting also in the context of this question about, okay, so who do we mean by men? What do we mean by masculinities? What kind of masculinities do we want to empower? and how does your report, interface with that?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll start with the second part, and it builds upon what Alex said about empowering the search for what basically what women have already done for a long time. So empowering the search of men to figure out, okay, who are we? How do we want to communicate? How do we want to be function egalitarian in egalitarian ways in society by learning to communicate, learning to listen, learning to make space, etc. Basically to learn to do care. And that requires bravery, looking at where men are now. And that's the opposite of what the manosphere does, because those answers are very clear cut, and they basically do away with any kind of search or vulnerability, or because they just give this recipe of do this, this, and this, and then you'll be successful. Instead of what we need is everyone to become more vulnerable. And this is where masculinities, and this we developed based on conversations with our European partners, and that by just establishing the gender binary as we traditionally internalize, everyone internalizes this in Europe in more or less the same ways. There were tiny differences, mainly language differences, which I also touch upon in the research. But by and large, it's just the category of masculinity, meaning men get taught to be strong and competitive, show leadership, take up space, but also be rational, be logical, be technical, etc. And then in the feminine category, there is often the first word is being sweet, being caring, being a mother, being making space, being the social glue, etc. So in masculinities, of course, there are no man completely fits that image, but every man needs to relate somehow to these images. And even if you're a man, which I experience a lot, men saying oh, I don't want to be strong and build muscles, so I don't think I have to relate to that category. Still, then that man has to relate to it in being invulnerable, being competitive, and especially leaving behind a lot of the traits that are in the feminine category. And this, through conversations with our European partners, were virtually the same in all countries. So when we talk about this, it's this conglomerate of traits which are traditionally attached to masculinity, but they are defined by what they're not. So what is in the feminine category, and those words that are in the feminine category actually are essential to function as a human being, but also to function in democratic ways, because you need to be able to listen, you need to be able to communicate well, you need to be able to make space. Things don't have to be a discussion where you're always winning, but they can be a dialogue. And I think this is also where it moves into the question of how masculinity can become democratic. This is by doing these values in practice. So a couple of days ago, I had a training in deep democracy, and was called Dialogue Under Pressure. This is something that Dutch schools can get this course. And then the teachers get taught how to do dialogue in a class around a sensitive subject. So it can be Israel, Palestine, for example. And this is exactly what we need in a classroom, that all the voices get a platform, so that also young men that are struggling with certain issues or have very strong opinions on those issues because they are in a process of being radicalized, that these things are given air, and that they are in a classroom in a moderated space, which is safe, which is focused on being egalitarian and being a dialogue, where they can actually experience how it is not to have to win over another, but how it is to hear another's perspective on giving space to someone else, and that is actually carrying masculinity in practice, and it's also democratic masculinity in practice.
I like what you mentioned. I mean, leading from what Simon said about masculinities and about this, how do you define it, and how do you define masculinities? And it's, I think, one part of the problem is that for longest time, the masculinity was defined in a negative, or more or less every definition in some way contains something like not being a woman in some form, not act like a woman, not behave like a woman, not think like a woman, not show emotion like a woman. Kick football like a woman. And I think that this is what I like then in the report, which I think, because I am one of these NGOs who work the same kind of field, like the people you interviewed, that the recognition that the problem is not just in interventions, in a sense that there are NGOs, there are people who have experience, who've been doing these interventions, working with men and boys for a long time, but that the problem is actually structural. That there is a structural problem that can be only done, can only be solved if we take the big picture, and that there is a movement, not only bottom up as we are doing, but that there is a move top down, that it requires sort of a political will and will to change the culture, to change the way how we approach things, to change the educational system, to absorb and include these discussions and this kind of work. I will just and that is very hard to do. I was recently at a conference in Vienna where there were representatives from all European countries in there. So there were ambassadors, high-level civil servants, and we were talking exactly the same topic. I was on stage on the panel, and there was a man from representing, I think he was from UK, and he asked me, how do we reach these boys? It was a very genuine question. He said, how do we reach these boys? How do we get to them before, Andrew Tate as a placeholder for these influences? And my answer was very simple. Like, I'm looking at the whole, and it was full of people I told them, you are all representative of governments. You all have Ministry of Education. You all have schools, and you all know where these boys are for 5-6 hours every day, from a very young age. Like, there is a place, there is a way to reach these boys, but it involves will to change, to adapt and adjust to the modern world, and to maybe, for the benefits, of our, future generation and kids, move a little bit from, again, traditional academic pressure that we expect schools to perform, and sort of teach these kids some life skills and prepare them for life rather than for work.
I think this is an excellent point, and I mean, this is as many wicked problems. This is also, a symptom of a different problem, right? I mean, it's like our education system is the problem in here, or maybe some other things as well. But I think there's a couple interesting things I wanted to follow up, and one is that in the report, as far as I remember, you even quote some boys who say that they follow Andrew Tate and not school because school does not care about them, and Andrew Tate does. Right? And it's this perception that I think young boys have, is that the system doesn't care about them. The system has failed them. The system does not acknowledge the problems that they have, or tells them that, they are privileged and they should not have problems. And then, they are looking for solutions to those problems because they're not finding it in the system. So I think that it's, calling for a reform of the system so that it actually, acknowledges this and maybe provides them with solutions. I think it's a great way to start. I think it's changing ossified, state education systems, I think it's a very long battle. So I wonder if there is other ways that we should also approach this in. And I think it's also related to the notion of masculinity, because I have to say that reading this report and reading so much literature about this, I have the impression that we should talk more about a certain value or something that especially young men and boys value, which I think is left out by this in a way that kind of shows our age and maybe class privilege as well, which is that we focus on things such as caring masculinities, we focus on things such as democratic masculinities. Meanwhile, Andrew Tate and CO show kids things that look cool and awesome. Right? And caring masculinity, democratic masculinity is morally right. This is all good, but it's not cool. It doesn't screech tires and comes with, and I worry sometimes that it's one of those things that we are kind of missing in here. And especially when we talk about the, different types of masculinities and all of it, is the fact that, especially when in the report, you say how important it is to meet men and boys where they are, right? So kind of capture the ways that they're thinking. And, they want to be cool. They want to be fun. They want to be awesome and look, have a good time with their friends and all of this. And I wonder if there is some way in which we can tap into it, because I don't think that tapping into it is through school, for example, right? School is by definition not fun, almost in the current world. And I wish that we lived in a world in which this wasn't the case. I mean, I'm an educator myself. I spend most of my life teaching at universities, and I really wish that this wasn't the case, but it is. And the way it is right now, I think that I would really like to point to maybe the need to look at ways that we can reach those people that are cool, that feel awesome, that feel empowering, but in the sense of, just kind of because I know that a lot of these ways that are cool or feel awesome are at the same time very much based on this status dominance and all of this, right?
Exactly,
and wealth or other things like that. And I wonder if there is some ways in which we could disentangle this. And it's really frustrating as well, because when you look at, parallels to this, I mean, the tobacco industry has done a really good job at tying smoking to being cool, right? There's nothing intrinsically cool about smoking, right? But they have had really good advertising, and they managed, right, to make smoking look cool. And I worry that we are kind of in this battle against, centuries of presenting, being a warrior as cool, or being somebody who's like a lone wolf as cool, or something like this. And things that are kind of tied with those traditional masculinities have had centuries and centuries of I don't want to use the word propaganda, but cultural messaging that have really grounded this belief that that's fun, that's cool, that's awesome, right? Waving around a massive sword, really cool. Helping those in need and feeding the hungry, really good, but kind of not cool,
so sexy,
right?
Yeah.
I wonder if there is some way in which you think, A, how does it feature in your thinking in there? And B, do you think we can tap into it somehow as well?
Yeah, many layered problem, many layered answer. So first of all, of course, there is the working, for example, with influencers, which, for example, our Polish partner Share the Care is doing in caring fatherhood campaigns that they use influencers, but that's caring fatherhood is quite low hanging fruit in that sense, that you can still get a lot of influencers to join in that battle, let's say. In the Netherlands recently, we had a case, a couple of connected cases of sexual violence, public sexual violence, and also femicides, which got a lot of attention. And there was also a wave of influencers speaking out about men needing to speak out. But there it gets complicated. The more like gender transformative narrative you want to have, the more complicated it becomes to get them to follow along. So often it's quite easy to do it about, for example, caring fatherhood. But then if you want to move it to really like transforming gender norms, like it gets less and less easy to get people to follow along. But it does happen to some extent. But I do agree that there's a lot of work to be done there to popularize our message and really reach people where they are. Because of course it's easy for me or for us to say this. We need to reach people where they are. How you can reach people is like transforming your language, for example, not using certain words that we internally would use to not lose kids. So there's also like softer forms of like reaching people where they are without having to put on like your head cap backwards and walking in and said like, hey, yo kids, are we one of yours or something? Because that's also pretending to be something that we are not, at least. So we can work with people that do, but and then there's the level of this is also a couple of days ago in The Guardian, there was this article about someone who de-radicalized from manosphere communities. And he also talked about, school is boring and school should focus more on entrepreneur classes for young men because that's what they really want. But I think at the point that you want to be an entrepreneur, already a lot has happened to form you to become that, to think that that is your way to become a valued human being. The good thing is that we don't want to push something on men that's not already there internally, especially if you look at 7-year-old boys, for example, often super sweet, super caring, involved. So it's not that we want to force 13-year-old boys to suddenly become caring or something. They have unlearned that caring, warm attitude over the years before. And we want to both offer other examples in that period so that they have to unlearn it less, and then at some later point tap back into their humanity, basically. What an interesting thing is, like I often do masculinity or gender talks in high schools, and often we do the question like, who is a male role model for you? And then I think about 80% of the time kids, all genders, but also the boys say my father. And then when asked why, they almost always say because he is sweet. That's like, okay, father is almost never traditionally, a sweet father is not like a traditional thing, but for almost all kids, that is an example. So this is something that I later on use when I explore gender stereotypes with them. And they shout masculine words and feminine words. In the feminine category, mother is always there. In the masculine category, father is almost never there. And then we do like trait words, and then sweet is never in the masculinity. And then I ask them, okay, but you think your father is really cool, but dads are not in the masculinity category, and sweetness is not in there. So how does that work? And then it's like, okay, when I think of cool, I think of that kind of cool. But actually, this is also cool. So it also has a lot to do with representation, which what they see in movies and now especially in social media, and what is presented as cool often is not what they instinctively feel is cool. Because they talk a lot about respect towards their male friends, a lot about respect to women. And in their behavior, it might be very different. They might be teasing each other. They might be calling the girls like sometimes pretty extreme words. But that those don't like stroke with their with what they ideally believe. So I think there's also a lot to gain there in not seeing these boys as only seeing Andrew Tate and fast cars as being cool, but presenting more often also, for example, in a teacher role, like searching manhood, a caring manhood, as something that is very valuable and that can actually be cool. An authority figure that shows care. Like one teacher, a math teacher that I did a class with, he was like greeting all the kids at the door with a handshake, saying their name and asking, how are you? Also all the boys, and they all responded. this class was completely different in their attitudes towards me and talking about gender than other classes that I come, where you have a teacher sitting in the back and says like, oh, I don't know what we're going to talk about today. Let's see what he has to say or something. This teacher had like this repertoire with his kids, showed care, did an introduction about his non-binary sibling. And there was just a completely different kind of cool. So I also think we should like rebrand cool a little bit, and also don't treat these kids as not being human, basically, even though they get shown that like Fast and the Furious or Andrew Tate or something is like the coolest in the world. They still often have way more like pro-human traits underneath their veneer of coolness, and they're all wearing the same clothes, etc. So that's already quite long answers.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one last thing is that we, as a society, should have everyone aware of how they are role models or not. So also what Alex said, if you have this whole class of government personnel, they are also fathers. They also maybe are on the board of their local soccer team, etc. So if you're a man living up like a slightly more caring masculinity while you're still, I don't know, cool, still being a soccer dad, still driving a nice car, still working in a prestigious job, you can also work in all those layers to present a little bit more of caring masculinity wherever you are. And I think we really underestimate that kind of change as well, that even if we get if we get normal men everywhere to add a little bit of this, then also this radical, basically anti-human words that Andrew Tate, for example, uses become far less attractive, I think, because they come to stand way farther of the lived daily examples that these boys and men see. Mm-hmm. That was the three things that I wanted to touch upon.
Fantastic, thank you. And Alex, did you have anything to add? Or?
No, I enjoyed listening, and I mean, just prior to this evening, I actually told Simon that I would prefer to listen, not talk myself as much. Yes, I think we need to give. It's not a linear sort of influence. It's not some sort of hypodermic needle kind of, that the message of Andrew Tate or whatever is like accepted by the boys' brain automatically. And I mean, they are much more smarter and than that. I mean, obviously, and I think there is nothing. One of the messages, and I know this because there are many organizations that work with. We work with sports organizations, with sports stars, football and stuff like that. You can work where boys are and where their interest is. So there are interventions done by NGOs involving, things that boys, as Simon said, that we can kind of are brought up to think they are cool. The fact is, the two things that I see there is that we as men, I think generally, whilst some men are violent and some men are whatever, vast majority is not. And I think we should, as men, be more involved and more, ready to how should I say, show. Lead by example. It involves a lot of introspection. It involves a lot of work, but it's doable and can be done. And I also think that we can easily, unlike what the messages of Tate and these guys, who is like, they want you to be a woman and wear a skirt and what have you, which is not the case. There is nothing wrong in if you're a young adult and I don't know, have a couple of beers and play a game of football with your boys, and do these things. These are not inherently there is nothing inherently wrong with much of the things that, we associate with masculinity. There is nothing wrong with, participating in sports or like being logical when the time needs you or the situation is like that, and being rational, and leaving, but the target is that being all that does not exclude, emotional processing, care, doesn't include, all the other stuff which is part of life. And being sort of defined by very few characteristics which you can or should apply to your life excludes a lot of life. The whole other half, and these boys and young men, as anybody else, they are whole. We just, the narrative needs to change, or we need to get better at it, or we need to work more. But boys will be fine. We need to have them around, have them along, kind of thing. I'm optimist still.
Excellent. Well, on this optimistic accent, let's move on then and talk a little bit about your solutions. So just for everyone listening as well, in the report, there is a whole chapter dedicated to, well, what do we do about this? And there is, on one hand, a description of a dual approach that you recommend. So on one hand, the report suggests that we should have a comprehensive society-wide prevention with a particular focus on fostering open, relational, and emotionally vulnerable conversations amongst men and boys. And on the other hand, we should collect, evaluate, and further develop targeted interventions supporting men and boys who are at the risk of radicalization, but also bystanders and the broader public, which needs a more systemic support rather than the kind of like more personal approach, right? And then in the report, I quite like that you offer specific mechanisms of change. And as far as I understand, the way the report was done was by getting members of all of those organizations that work with men and boys to talk about the kinds of interventions that they find are effective, and then kind of distilling out of them what are the main kind of strategies or what are the key mechanisms that really work. And you distinguish 3 mechanisms in there, and that is fostering empathy, transforming together, so having this kind of togetherness, and messages that focus on care and empowerment. And I wondered, I have thoughts about all of those. I think that they're absolutely excellent, but I maybe should pass on to you, Hassel, so that you can tell us a bit more about your work in them.
Yeah, I mean, the list was eventually kind of summarized in these 3 points, but I think at the high point, it contained 41 points, which I really liked because it was like all the small mechanisms, and they are like from these organizations, they were like, I found that really precious, like how many small, like detailed working mechanisms there are in doing these conversations. But of course, it was kind of like unworkable to present 41 things to a European Union reader who needs some concrete working points. So we kind of like started with a couple and then branched out a lot, and that's where like my biggest like learning process was. And then we boiled it down to these 3 points, which are, in some ways are a bit more vague again, but it also leaves it open for everyone who works in a specific field, for example, to see how they can do that in their field. And I talk most with teachers, but also with youth workers, with sometimes with like a board, the direction of a school or a larger school organization, for example. And on all these different levels, they might look a little bit different. I think, they're like the best of the best that you would need to do to start these conversations. And then in every context, they would be different. But if some of these aspects are missing, then you're gonna have a very complicated time in really getting to the core of the issue. For example, if there's not social safety guaranteed by and it has to do with designing your room in a certain way. So we always remove our tables, for example, sit in a circle, already making it a little bit more egalitarian, but it's also doing talking about safety practices with the group if you have the time, then talking together about how we want to relate to each other, etc. And if you don't have this safe space, men, young boys, but also older men, they will fold and sit with their hands crossed like this, and you won't be able to reach them as human beings in a search, basically. So all of these, like these three big things, but also every sentence has behind it these conversations about all the nitpicky stuff.
Yeah, I really liked. Maybe let's focus on them one by one as well, because I think this is really interesting, and it's kind of like the core, really, of the recommendation of the report, right? So you already talked about, like, the examples that you give have very much to do with the fostering of empathy, right? So creating a space in which people can feel safe, creating a space in which they feel like their problems are taken seriously. Like, we empathize with them, first of all, and like they are allowed to empathize with each other as well. And they can share stories, for example, and they can talk about their problems, kind of creating a space in which this is something, coming back to something you already said at the beginning of this whole session, a space in which they can see that actually everybody is struggling with various problems, and that all of those images that everyone is so cool and strong and all of that it's fake. It's not like that. This is not what real life is. And aspiring to that is just, setting yourself up for failure, because you will always feel inadequate, because you will never live up to an ideal that is kind of unattainable. And so I really like how your report kind of recommends creating those spaces in which that foster empathy, right? That create shared vulnerability, these kind of circles in which we can talk about our problems and witness each other's problems as well, and actually validate each other a little bit as well for, just like, hey, those are serious things you struggle with, right? And maybe I struggle with them as well. And that makes me think
so it's...
Sorry, yeah?
Well, so it's us validating that men have this surge, they seeing it in between themselves, but also men seeing the specific struggles of women, of young women not being able to go into the night alone easily, for example, talk about that, but also showing as a school institution that you care about these kids, that you do like a check-in where a boy can share a little bit about themselves. And this is something that hits home for me, because I remember in my high school, no one ever asked me, even though it was like a progressive high school and stuff, no one ever asked me, so what do you think about this? What do you want to get taught today? What do you want to talk about, etc.? So even doing like a little check-in with a class, for example, just shows that it gives a little bit of air to what are you actually experiencing as a human being, what lives in your life. And that already is the first step on this, creating a platform where you can collectively delve into this.
So building on what you just said as well, when I was reading this section, I very much thought about the various men's circles that are, popping up in various places. And there is like, people do that like organically. I have guided a whole bunch of men's circles myself. There's also organizations right now around different countries that do that. So in Britain, we have Andy's Men's Club, right? And in Poland, there is Masculinum, kind of like big organization that organizes these sort of men's circles. There's the Mankind Project that has its roots in the mythopoetic men's movement, and they're kind of this more spiritual type men's circles. And there are a lot of those popping up, I think. And it's really interesting that these spaces provide, they're based around the idea of providing an opportunity for men to be vulnerable and talk about their problems and finding understanding from other men as well. And I wondered what you would have to say, both of you, about this, especially also in the context of what you just mentioned, Hessel, which is that it's important that we don't only empathize with each other, but we also empathize with women and people of, who have different experiences than ourselves. And I was also struck by the fact that in this section, when you write about this, you also mentioned that in these sort of spaces in which we encourage sharing and vulnerability, we also need to protect and or encourage accountability. And you say that problematic ideas cannot go unchallenged; they must be met with dialogue, and that we need to kind of find ways in which we both allow people to share and express their emotions, but also, this is probably what a lot of I know incel spaces would be about as well, right? There's a lot of people expressing their emotions and where they are, but it's not kind of guided by the spirit of accountability and maybe checking each other. Hey, are you just kind of complaining about and putting your problems onto somebody else while actually, so yes, I was really wondering if you both have some thoughts about how this interfaces with the kind of maybe existing men's circles or the existing initiatives in this respect, and how to do that maybe so it also is done in the spirit of accountability and kind of empathizing with other people and not just the other men in the group.
I can go ahead, Hassel. Go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly about the last part. Yeah, that also requires some training and reflection on our own part of how do you give space to these to this search. But if for example, a young man in class says like women should be in the kitchen, that you really need some training in how to go on then, like checking their remark, like saying, hey, it's not okay what you're saying. Where did you hear that? Or to try to figure out what's behind it or what the influences or the searches behind it. But this requires teachers also to become far more engaged with their students and become more good in having difficult human conversations. Because I experience that teachers a lot of times say like, oh, then I either send him away out of the class or I ignore it because it becomes too much, too complicated, the conversation. And then, of course, these men continue to see it on their own, and for the rest of the class, it's unsafe. And then before kicking it over to Alex, I would say, I also have a men's circle myself, and I would say what we try to foster in class is a little bit of such a circle. And of course, these men later in life know what they have lacked and often come to these circles because they feel what has been missing because of their masculinity. If you do that in class, you can prevent basically or already plant some seeds that these young boys can take along in life and hopefully not end in crisis situations, which often lead men to go look for such circles. But yeah, such as circle dynamic is what, in a brief moment, we hope to have in classrooms all the time, and but also in boardrooms and also in student organizations and in soccer clubs, and yeah. Then I can kick over to Alex for some more.
No, which just from experience, and going back to you saying that there were 41 different ways or strategies or whatever. For a long time, I think it was not prerogative, but it was common and usual to expose the privilege. That you have to be aware of the privilege, and often that can lead to just being defensive, and in my experience and what works for me is that you have to expose the privilege, you have to show it. Because it can be a starting point of the discussion, but you have to. For me, again, it works. Is that you have to appeal to their sense of justice, because they can understand when something is not just, and I think that it goes a little bit under the empathy approach, but which just telling you how multifaceted the issue is, because I always, when I talk about these things, the one thing that I keep on saying, you have to be ready. You have to be ready, and because the issue is multifaceted, then the responses or have to be multifaceted as well, and you have to be prepared. You have to be prepared. You have to, be well versed in the topic that you're discussing, and be ready for any question that might come out. Number one. Number two, accountability, definitely, and this is where being ready is a crucial part. But also, not only be ready, but be ready in a sense that be prepared that different questions have to be answered in a different way in order. Sometimes it's good to reverse the situation. What would if this was put them in the shoe? Sometimes it's good to use humor. They love it. It works really, really well. And sometimes the direct
we had humor in there.
Sometimes you have to use direct answers, some sort of logic and facts work, and I'm guessing it comes a bit to like pedagogy, like you have to, how do you teach these things? And the last but not least is, yes, men's circle have been popular lately. But men's circles have been done and organized by, people that we don't want. I'm kidding. But by people who are actually associated with manosphere, especially in the Nordic countries, and they've been doing it for years. And again, their efforts are not that bad, because there is something there about community of men and stuff like that. But they're again, missing certain points. So, I'm planning on, maybe I'm discussing with my partner from my NGO, because we haven't done one. We want to try it and see how it's going to work. But I'm just going to say that without like any outside effect, I know that there is a small group of men in Malta who are, how shall I say, they are about to become fathers, or just became fathers, and they slowly somehow found each other, and they created this secret group, which I was invited later on, to talk and whatever. But they have this group, and there is like 150 of them, and basically they exchange their experiences. They ask each other questions, how they handle, becoming the pregnancy, birth, becoming fathers, and they invite experts to give them talks, about breastfeeding, about this or that, about sex during pregnancy, after giving birth, and they're curious and they don't know and they didn't know, and they self-organized and they created this group, and they're supporting each other and exchanging experiences and seeking expertise. So I think, the demand is there. We just need to find a way to meet it.
Yeah, and this is this lived vulnerability that we often see when men are about to become fathers or just became fathers, and then we are also trying to find ways to encourage these kind of things in a context where boys are being like held in place by their peers, etc. So also try to foster this this caring surge before they already are 30, for example, and have this long trajectory of damages and complications and loneliness, etc. behind them. And that's why we need to be in schools.
I really like the focus on schools as well, because I think, as you rightly identify in the report, by the time you get to people in their 20s and 30s, that the damage has been done. But also, I think it's really important to realize that because of the structure of this traditional or hegemonic masculinity, and how it devalues men for asking for help, or admitting that they don't know, or having any humility at all, it's very difficult for them to actually stop and ask, right? And this is perhaps why there are only few moments in a life of a man's life in which it is actually okay to stop and say, I don't know how to do this, and I can actually be open to listening. And fatherhood is one of them, right? It's like you become a father and
Absolutely.
you go like, oh, I don't know how to do that. I will actually meet some other guys and maybe talk about this. So I think there's other work that has been already done on like pinpointing those critical moments in which it's maybe easier to find people. But I think that, focusing on earlier education is definitely a good strategy in that. Now that takes us to the second point in there, which the second key mechanism that you talk about, which is transforming together and kind of making sure that this is a joint venture. I don't know, and this is already kind of embedded in the idea of a men's group or a men's circle, right? Because that's already a joint process, and maybe the example of the fathers who are joining together to do something like that is a good example as well. But I like what you wrote in there about how like just being together and sharing stories kind of on one hand undermines this real man ideology because, well, you see that we are all struggling, right? But also presents an opportunity that maybe we as people who are wanting to help guide this sort of change could really like catch on with, which is to find really good narratives that are kind of community-based narratives that allow us to reimagine masculinity in a way that would help to, people to find together some sort of ways of, building something better that would actually be more fulfilling or attractive or, answer their questions and insecurities and all of that, like you write in the report. And I wondered if we could focus maybe for a moment about this kind of togetherness and how it's not only togetherness of a men's circle or something like that, but also the togetherness of having the right role models or having someone to look up to. For example, you mentioned before the role models. You mentioned also that some organizations have been kind of teaming up with celebrities or with influencers or something like this. And I wondered if there's any more in here to talk about with respect to like specific recommendations. Okay, so what do we do to take this communal togetherness aspect of it and build on that?
Yeah, I think a most important one, which I encounter constantly, is that people always want to see themselves as being a finished product in this sense and talking about someone else who is a problem. So I see it with one school saying, we don't do it as badly as them, so you should go there. Thereby, we don't need to do anything about themselves. But I also see this with individual people. That a lot of people want to talk about the manosphere as if it's like something super far away and it's only young men that get radicalized. Suddenly, we've all been doing so well in the West and suddenly there's this manosphere. And we really need to get to a point where like we all don't really know this and we should really get the self-image of that it's finding out together as a society, but also all the individuals in there. How we are doing this, how we've done this, how we want to do it in the future. So, for example, and that makes it really important that you also present yourself as a searching person to kids, to young men. So as a teacher, not presenting yourself always as a person who knows the answer, but share with them how your own search has been, about finding a job, about how you were when you were a 14-year-old kid, and that it might be okay, but that you learned when you were 28 how nice it actually was with your male friends to not always do these hard jokes, but sometimes ask, how are you really doing, especially when someone's mom is sick. And these are like stories that get these kids thinking, because if these kids always see adults presenting this clear image to them of like being finished products who are not doubting, then we are only reinforcing this. And I think this is a huge damage that we are accidentally doing by wanting to present ourselves as like stable factors. We're basically not telling them that their search is critical, that it's legitimate, that everyone has had it. So I think that's a really big search for everyone, whether you're like a trainer like me standing in front of the class, but also teachers, but also parents, especially fathers. Like, talk with your sons about the times that you didn't know, that you were searching. And this opens up so much space for these young kids to also come with a story about something that they don't know. And if they share something about what they don't know, that might lead to a deeper conversation about their actual like search behind it, about insecurities, etc. And then you're reaching a stage where you can actually do some preventive work on not having this search leading to finding these radical answers. So this transformation should be not looking down upon young men as being aliens or being like the problem or something, but really seeing their struggle as something which is societal, but also something that is within ourselves, and finding our own stories. Like I always often share the story of my best friend. I'm 35 now, and he's 35. And we always knew how we were doing on the surface, but we never talked about it because we knew it made the other person feel uncomfortable talking about the feelings. So there's kind of like understanding of 5 minutes of a conversation, and then we didn't delve deeper. And after I started working with my masculinity and working in this field, I just said to him like, hey, I noticed that we always do this. How are you feeling about that? And he just said like, oh yeah, wow, I really would like to try something different. And that just took a lot of effort because we had grown accustomed to this for like 25 years of dealing with each other. So it really felt forced sometimes to like go deeper and ask another question, even though it wasn't there. And that just brought us so much deeper connections and deeper understanding, etc. And I often share like, and this in like a brief form or a bit like more for a younger audience, but how strange it can be to be best friends with someone, but go through life as like these separated pillars of actual, in-depth human understanding, and also a lot of like deeper knowledge about our hobbies and passions and etc. So I think in that sense, this telling of the story that everyone needs to like start discovering for themselves how they got more in touch with their humanity by saying, hey, I don't know, let's explore together.
Yeah, excellent. I find this really, really fascinating as well in terms of just platforming these sort of voices and finding ways to really show that these are stories of like I don't like the word success because it's so seen in such a shallow way, but present people like this as just like that's what should be aiming for. That's the kind of life that is actually rewarding and nice.
Yeah. And I often use the words like, I started blossoming again because I got out of my loneliness by talking about that and connecting with people about that and letting go of my feeling of rationality that I had because the world is a scary place. And I thought I always needed to have the answers. But by always thinking I needed to have the answer, I was blocking actually engaging with other people around finding the answer together. And so this like really, even if it's only planting seeds, because of course, usually I'm only there for like 1.5 or 2 hours with these kids, but just sharing that I didn't know and I was doing stuff because of legitimate reasons, but it held me back of actually connecting with other people.
Yeah, I really like this as well because of the work that I've been doing with Men Engaged and with my own organization on positive narratives. And I think that you really kind of struck a chord with me, and you formulated it really nicely in the report when you write that role models and counter narratives work as visible example of a reimagined masculinity. Intervention should validate the search of boys and men and show healthier options as more fulfilling, attractive, and as real answers to their questions and insecurities. So the idea being, I think, really strong in here, that's what I want to promote as well, that the essence is to promote doing it and promote doing like embracing those different masculinities because it's great, because this actually leads to fulfillment and happiness and creating systems in which everyone can be better off. Not doing that through this kind of like, guilt narratives or narratives that like you are a horrible human being if you don't. Right? Yeah. I think this is something that I would really like to also promote, and I'm really happy that your report does that as well, because I think this is the way. And in a way, you mentioned this article in The Guardian recently in which this guy was talking about getting out of the manosphere or out of the influence. And like one of the big things that he was mentioning in there, as far as I remember, was that this is how they get you, right? They get you because they tell you that if you do those things, you will be awesome. It will be fun and your life will be great. And will it? I mean, probably not, right? It's there's
I often say to the kids, like, friendships are and healthy relations with good communication will be way more worth to you than fast cars and
And if we can also make it sound cool, I think that would be a better sell. But I think, there's definitely I think that presenting it as just desirable because it makes your life better, rather than as a obligation to do that, because otherwise, if you don't, then you won't find a girlfriend, right? Or if you don't, then you're an evil human or something like this, which has been, a staple of a lot of narratives. I think this would be really useful. And I think this leads us also to the third point key mechanism that we identify in there, which is that our messages should focus on care and empowerment. And that you write in there, ultimately transforming masculinities is not about telling boys and men who to be. It's about inviting them to grow, offering them meaningful alternatives, and empowering them to be part of the solution. And this is, I think, all great thoughts and things to aspire to. And I'm actually really curious to stay politically on top right now. What do you think about Zoran Mamdani? And the fact that his message was very empowering and kind of focused on positivity and all of that, and he won, right? And this he came out of nowhere and he just won won New York. And I'm really curious, how do you see that as well in the context? I don't think that his message was very focused on masculinity, but it was also a very positive message focused on this empowerment, right? And I'm curious, how do you see this also maybe in this context of what's happening in politics now?
Yeah, I think luckily under this thin layer of anger and fear fueled right wing and far right wing momentum, there is a lot of need for care, and a lot of people that are so angry and so scared are that because they feel uncared for by this society. And also individual men that radicalize often state feeling uncared for. There's this the Ecomundo report 2023, where 2/3 of young men said no one really knew them. So that's 66% have no single individual that really knows them. And this someone really knows me is centrally important in feeling rooted in society, in community. So if we as a society don't care for or make these young men feel cared for, then it's logical that they go and find for something that fills that hole. And it can be far right radicalization, manosphere radicalization. It could be religious radicalization. It can also be sense of control through domestic violence. It can be substance addiction. It can be gaming, which is also, I think, a huge thing in male loneliness and something that I've dealt with myself. So all of these come from a similar motor of a lack of feeling rooted, a lack of control, a lack of warmth. And in that sense, it's also very much about empowerment, and Mamdani, very much about empowerment of the disenfranchised, of the marginalized, but it's also empowerment of these men who are actually, their search is fueled by insecurity, by uncertainty. And it's empowering. I've experienced it myself with my best friend, how empowering it is to start talking about these things, to see what was happening in my life and how it was a barrier for more fulfilling relationships, starting to talk about it, which is also not a super masculine thing to do, him responding well, and our relation blossoming. It was super empowering. So also just getting insight in how this stuff works, also for young men to do, for example, this exercise with them once about traditionally masculine traits, traditionally feminine traits, and just show them how they are from a young age already stuck in these two things, can give a little bit of tools of empowerment. And yeah, no, that's good enough for now. But yeah, it's really like connected to these positive narratives. That your direction in that is amazing. I think it goes even deeper into these aspects of like the specific words you need to use and not to use. And yeah, also we discussed the use of, for example, toxic masculinity as being very, very harmful. And even traditional masculinity, where there's a lot of debate about with our Polish partner, because traditional anything will get valued much higher there. And if you call traditional masculinity bad, you're really attacking some core family values. So there was like an exploration in itself, and we decided not to divert from that in the end. But
I just in case that somebody is watching who is not familiar with this, Simon has been working really, really hard for a while now, preparing a document about positive narratives or different narratives that can be used in, rather than traditional ones and the ones used by these influencers and manosphere and so on and so forth. So that should be coming out soon. It's in the final stages, no?
It is very much, yes. And thank you very much, Alex, for your help in preparing it as well. So I appreciate the shout out. And thank you for mentioning it in your report as well. So much appreciated. I hope that it will be a going conversation.
Yeah.
I wondered if in the last maybe 10, 12 minutes we've got, I wanted to ask a couple kind of more contentious questions, or like one especially, which I think is really interests me personally when it comes to finding good ways to formulate messages. And that uncomfortable realization is that what if we invite all of those people to grow and think for themselves and all of this, but they don't really want to, right? They just want to be given answers. And I think that there is something that we learn about society, and this is not just men, this is humans in general, I think. There's a reason why articles that are called 5 ways to do this, or 10 simple ways in which you can improve X, are much more popular than articles that, invite you to really consider, things in detail and take multi-perspective approach or whatever else. There's a reason why, Jordan Peterson got famous after he wrote 12 Rules for Life. I mean, it's simple. It's straightforward. People like simple answers. And I wonder if you, in this work as well, where I know that you mentioned that a couple of times in the report, but I felt like maybe it could do with a bit more fleshing out. What is the good balance between creating or sending out messages that take into account the fact that life is complex, and reducing life to black and whiteness is never going to do it justice and will never lead you anywhere good, right? But at the same time, people like simple messages, and maybe also people have a million other things going on in their lives. And they just don't have, even if they wanted to, they don't have the time or space or headspace or maybe something, capacity to actually engage with something more complicated. It doesn't need to be that they're lazy. It doesn't need to be that they are really, stupid or unwilling to do this or evil in some other way. They just have other stuff going on, right? So they might just not be ready to take in very complex messages. And I think this is also, unfortunately, made more difficult by the world we live in which, if something cannot be expressed in one tweet or in one minute long TikTok video, then it won't get your attention, right? Or especially in gaming culture as well, in which people are just used to the fact that there is this and this and this thing you need to do, and there is a guaranteed result if you do. This is how, this is when you think of pickup artist rhetoric, this is how it's structured, right? It's like you need to do A, B, and C, and then result falls out. And people like this sort of thinking. And this sort of thinking is, I'm a philosopher. Every answer to every question philosophically is, it depends, and it needs more explanation. But People don't like that. So I wonder if, based on your research in here and on your report, you have maybe can give us a little bit more of a, get us a little bit closer to to answering the question of what is a good balance between having enough nuance so that you don't slip into black and whiteness, but on the other hand, also delivering a message that is simple enough that people actually have the patience, the capacity, and the willingness to engage with it.
Yeah, very big and important question. Like big in the sense of like difficult to answer in one manner. I agree that there should be way more attention to it, and would be interesting to develop this sometimes, to try and do like a 5 ways to do better masculinity, and just say like once a week, listen for 2 minutes without talking, for example, and just see what happens. So something like this definitely could be very interesting to develop, to see what would we put in there, and what would these core things be. Like asking your female friends how they experience the public space, for example, is some very practical thing that all men can do to practice a little bit of like empathy and like role reversing fantasy, let's say. So that's just something that popped up that would be very interesting to kind of like challenge these simplistic narratives with like simplistic guide of how you could be a little bit more of a caring or democratic man. But my less sexy answer is basically what's also at the end of the report, is that we need this to be ingrained in education from a young age. Is basically already in primary school there should be attention given to how do you do human relations, social relations. How do you do humaning? Like what's important to you? Where do you get your values from? How are you rooted? What is consent, etc.? And that would like be upgraded in like the last year or maybe in high school to gender relations, and that everyone gets this information package of like you're going to go through life with these pressures always being there. And because that's lacking, everyone just does something, and that makes it way easier that people do the easier answer because it seems attractive, even though it will backfire on them massively and lead to a lot of complications for men, like way higher suicide rates, etc., etc. So there's also this like challenging that these easy answers that they give are really easy answers. And at Emancipator, we often say like you got to go slow to go fast. These easy answers often are not that easy, are very complex. If you want to get muscles and get rich and get big cars, it's not. It sounds easy, but it's not that easy because almost no one manages to lead that life. So I think there's also this the way that it's pronounced, the clarity of those voices and the simplicity of the message, even though the actual line is not so simple, that the progressive answers could learn something from, that there's this lack of a counterweight of focusing on basic human rights or equality, for example, and letting kids hear that every day through their through the educational system. But for that, we would need like more structural commitment on all levels. And this is also what we found problematic with this report. Like we've often done this. These organizations are working for in this field for a super long time. And often then we write another toolkit or another report. And then it's very unclear where the actual change is going to come from. So I think that's also a big part in this, that if we want this people be more receptive to complicated messages, we need to start early to train them to be more receptive of like a democratic process, to be in high school classes where they actually participate democratically so that they have an interest in democracy. Because who gives a fuck about democracy if you're never asked anything before you're 18, and then suddenly you can vote, and then suddenly you have to choose all these complicated things while you have never experienced a classroom with a complex layered debate where you have to give, where you're not in a discussion where you have to win, but where you're in a dialogue to understand other people, etc.
We're back to having to reform our whole education system then.
Yeah. The problem is the list can provide clarity if you can, but we cannot lose our ability to nuance, because if you're feeling down, this guy, go to the gym, and you can't bench press yourself out of depression. So these kind of might work for few, but not for many.
It could be talk to a friend. That's always useful.
Yeah, but it could, simplifying it too much carries risks.
Yeah.
So we cannot. Yes, we need to find a way to simplify them, because the language, we are deconstructing masculinities and political, economical life we live in, gender, which is in itself very complex issue. And we need to look for narratives. We need to look for different approaches from a younger age, maybe creating a base from a younger age, and then these ideas at later stage will be more, easily absorbed and understood. But we cannot. The nuance, ability to nuance, has to be there. You're right. It's unfortunate that we live in a time where the shortness of a message, but you can't. Certain things you cannot explain in 120 characters.
Yeah. And I notice with Emancipator, but also with this project, we get pulled by a European Union, by a lot of also schools that approach us solve this. There's sexting going on in the second grade of high school. Come to our school, give a 1.5 hour session and fix it.
Yeah.
So then often we say we can't, but I also agree with you, Simon, that we also sometimes lose with focusing only on this grand narrative, as I also did now, that we sometimes lose giving some very concrete stuff that that people can work with. And that's something that sometimes we might shy away from that because it's so it's so complex to do this very easily.
Yeah, it's surprisingly difficult to find this balance, right? And I guess I'm looking forward to seeing if you find a recipe to write, I don't know, an article called "Those 5 Things." We'll do those 5 things every week, and we will be a democratic man. You won't believe number 4.
I mean, to be a successful man or a successful human being, I mean, it could really be just communicate, go out of your way, or sit still for 5 minutes and feel what's going on inside you and tell one other person about something. And it would be magical for a lot of men in society, I think, to try that approach for once.
I think that there is real potential in something like this. And once again, I think we all have our opinions about Jordan Peterson. But I think when he was writing 12 Rules for Life, it was something like that. So the rule is very simple. And then he still writes 30 pages about this, right? So he goes into some nuance and some details and all of this, and we disagree with the content. But, perhaps it's a method as well, right? It could be...
Yeah.
I don't know if it's how to striking this balance. I think that's the kind of gold that would be nice to.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. Yeah, still.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you very much both for this excellent discussion. I really appreciate your time, and Hassel especially. Thank you for taking time to talk to us as the author of this report. I hope that Men for Them will continue from strength to strength, and we will have more fantastic outputs from this project. And we're looking forward to talking to you about them as well. And now I guess I will simply invite everyone to join us for the next edition of Discussing Men. Here are some logos of the people who are involved in this. And if you are interested in more information about this, you can go to the Pathforge website or contact me directly on contact@pathforge.org or follow us on any of those social media. And now, yes, I will just invite you to join us again next month for the next edition of Discussing Men. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Thanks. Bye.